Paul Brown is a former military intelligence officer, and he has also, I believe, recently written a book on total war. And he came recommended to us to come talk about what it takes to wage war, and I think he has some first-hand experience in it, so we're very pleased to have you come and talk to our little corner of the county.
Thank you.
So, thank you for coming.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. I'm very excited to speak to you all tonight. I was telling someone else earlier, I've done this talk or talks like this many times, but I'm always very excited to give it because I'm very passionate about this subject. It's something that I personally believe is of utmost importance for the security and liberty of our nation going forward. So before I really get into that, just a little bit about me so you have context of where I'm coming from. I grew up initially in rural Arkansas. I came from a military family. My dad was a Marine Corps officer. I had two Army uncles, a grandfather in the Army, a grandfather in the Air Force, another grandfather in the Air Force, and a great uncle in the Marine Corps. And me and my brother and my two oldest cousins, all four of us were around the same age. We all joined the military. My brother and I, the Marine Corps, and one of my cousins in the Army, the other, the Navy. So it was no surprise when that happened. We'd been learning about warfare our whole lives, the military our whole lives, and we learned things that I took for granted that other people knew. We learned that the way to win a war is to completely defeat your enemy. To defeat your enemy, you either completely annihilate them so there are none left, or you annihilate so many of them to such an extent that the remaining enemy surrender unconditionally. That's how you defeat your enemy. But what I learned as I grew up and learned more about history, about how we have fought wars since World War II, and then upon joining the military myself, was that apparently not everybody does know that. Apparently, a lot of people think that the best way to defeat the enemy is to win hearts and minds, or to defend against their attacks, or to condemn what the enemy does in the strongest terms, or to try to negotiate with the enemy and hope that eventually they will see the logic of peace and they will back down. And these are all things that we've done. So, before I go further forward, how many veterans do I have here? Thank you all for your service. This is why I do this. This is why I care. Because you, your brothers, your friends, your family have given time and blood and sweat and tears to the defense of this nation. And this nation has not repaid you by committing to win the conflicts to which you have been sent. This is true for me, this is true for you, and this has been true for many of our brethren. When you look at the history of the United States in warfare, up until and through World War II, we fought something called total war. And total war has two spheres, if you will. You have the economic industrial side, and then you have the combat side. In the economic industrial side, you're talking about all of the economic power of that nation going towards winning that war. In World War II, you saw factories converted to building bombers and tanks and small arms and ammunition and ships and so on. You saw rationing of supplies. You know, you couldn't just go and buy as much gasoline or sugar or flour or many other things as you wanted. It was all rationed. That was the industrial economic side. Then you had the combat side of total war, which has to do with the tactics and techniques and equipment you employ in order to win. And this is what I'm mainly going to be discussing today. Partially because there haven't been any conflicts since World War II where we would have needed to employ the full industrial economic might of the United States to win. We have the advantage far beyond any other military. We have the most powerful military, the best trained, the best equipped, the best funded. We have a very motivated military with people in it who have the mental attitude to do whatever it takes to win. Unfortunately, what we haven't had since World War II is leadership in Washington that is willing to do whatever it takes to win. In Vietnam, we fought a defensive war. We said, here's a line, we don't want the enemy to cross it. But we did not go across that line to invade. We did run bombing campaigns, but they were very limited in nature. They clearly weren't enough to change the enemy's mind. We set invisible lines for ourselves on the battlefield where we could not cross, but the enemy could. You saw in Cambodia and Laos, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army had vast and very effective supply chains in which they moved troops and equipment and supplies from North Vietnam down to South Vietnam, where they fought us very effectively. We decided that we could not go into Cambodia and Laos. We placed artificial limits upon ourselves that decreased and degraded our ability to fight the enemy. And you see this same theme across virtually every conflict in which we've entered since World War II. In Korea, we were much more offensive or on the offensive than any conflicts since then. However, we still drew a line. We didn't want to go into China. And there were a lot of reasons at that time why that was the case. The Americans were afraid of another world war. You had the entire communist bloc. In my opinion, I don't think that we needed to worry about Russia nuking us if we had invaded China at that time, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't really count for much. The point was that was the beginning of us limiting ourselves, and you saw the results of that. In Korea, we had a tie. We didn't win, per se. We didn't lose, per se. And you've seen the results of how the North Korean people have had to live ever since then. Millions and millions murdered by their own government. Millions put in concentration camp. An entire people group that believes the most insane things because they have no choice but to believe only what their government tells them. They don't have access to outside information. And I mean, that's an ongoing tragedy that every day they live under that tyranny. Fast forward to more recent history. Desert Storm is the closest conflict to, or closest thing to a conflict in which we fought correctly. We went and we fought very hard. To put it in perspective, at the height of our time in the most recent conflict in Iraq, we had about 160,000 troops on the ground. We deployed over 700,000 U.S. troops in Desert Storm, and we annihilated the Iraqi army, except for those that didn't surrender, and a lot of those who did or had been willing to surrender. But as soon as Iraq did back down and surrender, we pulled out, we left Saddam Hussein in power, and you saw that we had to go in 12 years later and deal with him again. Or whether we had to or not, we chose to go in 12 years later and deal with him. Clearly, the problem had not been solved. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we made the same mistakes we made in Vietnam. Afghanistan offers some very, very easy parallels because you had Pakistan right next door where the Taliban and other groups were using Pakistan to move supplies, people, to recruit, to harbor their leadership. And once again, we drew an invisible line at the border and said we can't go there because of diplomatic reasons. We put limits on ourselves and the enemies took advantage of that. It's like playing a board game and playing Monopoly and telling the other player that they can, they don't have any rules, but we do. Oh yeah, you can just pull money out of the bank. I'm sure we'll still win though because we have the better funding, right? Wrong. So why is this a problem? I mean, on face value, it's pretty obvious why it's a problem, but let's kind of discuss why. In this room tonight, we're exercising so many of our rights, our God-given rights and our rights that are outlined in the Constitution, our right to free speech, our right to practice religion. We said a prayer earlier. Some of you may be practicing your right to bear arms, and if so, I applaud you. There are so many rights that we take for granted that we have, and there are those around the world and in our country who do not want us to have those rights. They do not respect those rights. And if they have power over us, they will strip those rights from us. I want to protect those rights. And since in the last 70 years, we have not won a major conflict, not in its entirety, we're degrading our strategic ability to do so in the future. For one, every time we go into a conflict and we don't decisively win, we embolden our enemies. What is really the true cost of going to war with the United States? In World War II or prior, you could have said vast destruction of your infrastructure, your people, your military, and then occupation for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years after that. But since then, the cost really isn't that high. Sure, you may have to fight us for 5 years or 10 years, but in the end, we'll leave, and even though you've sent a lot of your pawns to die in battle, you or some other leadership will still be in place to push whatever ideology or political movement or idea or whatever the case and accomplish that. In the end, what is the cost of fighting the United States? And we also degrade our own ability to win. If we turn around tomorrow and had to fight another war, we would be ill-prepared to win because the American people in general don't have the mental attitude to accept what it would take to win. And that's what I'm here to talk about changing. I can literally speak all day about the problems with our strategies and how we fought wars, but what I want to talk today about most is solutions. All right? In order to change the way we fight wars, we have to change the way we make decisions about war. And as you know, politicians are very instrumental in the way we make decisions about war. Unfortunately, they're making the most important decisions that should be made by generals. Ideally, by generals who are in the area of operations, on the ground, and taking part in it. Not generals that are essentially politicians with uniforms on. All right, of which, unfortunately, there are, to some extent, some. I'm not throwing a blanket statement over all generals, but there are a lot of generals who are more concerned with their careers than they are with the ability and the necessity of the United States to win wars effectively. So, in order to affect the way politicians make decisions about wars, we have to educate the public. We have to educate individuals one by one in a grassroots effort to help them understand that war is not easy. It will not fall into your set, defined way of doing it. It's not orderly. It is not clean. It does not respect life. We have gotten used to the idea that, okay, we should send some cruise missiles, send a targeted special operations team, send stealth fighters, and we can surgically, carefully take out key individuals and the whole thing will end. Wrong. And even when we try to fight that way, we still don't end up actually limiting civilian deaths that much. In Iraq, an estimated 132,000, that's the low estimate, of Iraqi civilians have died. That's the low estimate, that's when we're trying not to kill any civilians. And the fact of the matter is, unless we commit, or unless we had committed to winning that conflict, all those civilians died essentially for nothing. All of those U.S. servicemen that died and were injured, why? What is the point unless you're willing to win? I was explaining the things that war is not, and it's the opposite of those things. War is chaotic. War is dirty. War is cruel. War is bloody. War is terrible. And until you accept that, you cannot actually win war because you aren't prepared to do what it takes to win. Creating the correct expectations is paramount. At the beginning of Vietnam, we told the American people that it would take about 8 weeks. It would be an 8-week operation. That's what we were prepared for. At the beginning of Iraq, I don't believe and Afghanistan, I don't believe a specific time was laid out, but people were expecting operations that would be over in several months. And you cannot put your own perceptions of how it's going to play out on it. You're either going to win or you're not. So if we can do this, if we can convince people that you have to be willing to fight total war, and if they can in turn convince their representatives that that is how you fight major conflicts, what will this do? Well, for one, we'll start winning the conflicts we enter, which is incredibly important. You know, if we keep losing for long enough, it will come home and hit us in a bad way eventually. Two, I believe very, very seriously that we will end up going into less conflicts. All right? When you really acknowledge the cost of war, what it takes to win, you might have a little more incentive not to go to war. I think Afghanistan is a good example of a conflict where we absolutely should have gone. And we were clearly attacked by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was residing in Afghanistan, hosted by the Taliban, which refused to give up Al-Qaeda and was clearly a very evil government. We had every right to go in, and beyond every right, we had every right and responsibility to go in, destroy Al-Qaeda, and destroy Taliban virtually at all costs. Iraq is one that's more in the gray area. Now, if you could theoretically win Iraq the way we fought it, in a limited style of warfare, then clearly there's more incentive to go in. Why not? Get rid of Saddam Hussein. He's a bad guy. We can make sure this whole nuke thing, this whole WMD thing is put to bed. Just do it, right? But the fact of the matter is, that way can't work, and as we saw, it didn't work. So when we had been making our decision about Iraq, we'd been like, well, we're going to have to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people. They won't be able to come back until we win. It could result in a lot of deaths in our own people, a lot of deaths in the enemy, and in the civilian population. And the only way to guarantee a win is to completely destroy large sections of the country. Are we sure we want to go in? Maybe we wouldn't have gone. Maybe we still would have. But at any rate, we would not have fought a war for 10 years only to leave and let the entire thing fall to pieces. And that kind of brings me to a little bit of what's going on now in the Middle East with the Islamic State and the Taliban growing in strength in Afghanistan, and the Houthis, which are backed by Iran, overthrowing the Yemeni government, and the Islamic State and other rebel groups in Syria fighting the Iran-backed Bashar al-Assad government. What you have in the Middle East right now is a chaotic, violent environment of proportions we have not seen in a very, very long time. The Middle East is literally in chaos. And in the United States, what you see is a lack of leadership, a lack of resolve, and a lack of commitment. While we maintain involvement, we have around 3,000 troops in Iraq and around 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. We are not committed toward any specific end. We're not committed to being involved in the conflict, while we're also not committed to leaving the conflict. We're in the middle. And that's a terrible place to be. As someone who served in Iraq, I can say I would hate to die in Iraq right now. For what? You know, we don't have a goal. I would just be there because the president wants me there, because I guess he doesn't want to look like he's totally pulling out, while he also doesn't want to look like he's very involved. And so, if I could sort of direct your thoughts, your attention, whatever the case, towards one specific thing, it would be this: that we have to make clear and decisive decisions. And I'm not even going to say I think we should be more involved in Iraq or less, or we should be more involved in Afghanistan or less. But I'm saying that that's the decision. There is no middle road. In this case, there is no middle road. And if we can get the American people and the politicians to understand that, whatever decision we make, it will be better than it is now. Because to me, it's not worth the cost to send young American men and women to conflicts that we will not commit to winning. I want to go ahead and open it up for questions. We have a few more minutes before our next speaker. I don't want to just blab the whole time. Yes, Eric.
I don't know if it's how accurate it is, but I read, I think it was like the last week on some news posts online, that now that they were saying ISIS and Al Qaeda are going to go at it.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is.
ISIS and Al Qaeda are enemies. I want to further complicate this whole picture, and trust me, it gets much more complicated than that. That's just one complication. Have you ever heard the phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Yes.
That's not always true. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is also your enemy. Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, they're both terrible enemies of each other and also terrible enemies of us. We don't want either of them to win. I would be happy if both of them lost some magical way. What else? Yes.
Are they fighting each other?
They are fighting each other. They've been fighting each other for a couple of years now. The Islamic State, just for very, very brief history, they came out of a group called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And that was, several years ago, they broke away. Their ideology was more exclusive than Al-Qaeda. People say, well, like, Islamic State is more extreme than Al-Qaeda. I disagree with that classification. I would say that in their ideology, they were more exclusive than Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was more willing to work with other groups, even if their ideology didn't match up exactly. The Islamic State said you have to agree with us, and you have to be on our side. You have to swear allegiance to us, or we're going to cut off your head. What you found is that was a very effective way to recruit and put your message out there, because the Islamic State they've shown resolve in what they're doing, and all the fighters in the region, they see that. Now, they don't all agree with them, but you see a lot from them. Yes.
All right, so I guess I want to push back a little bit, because I think that when Bush II decided to go in and remove Saddam Hussein, right? We had a hot war, we had a mission, and it was basically accomplished, relatively quickly, right?
Yes.
And then we had, kind of mop-up operations, right, where we created a vacuum by removing the power, and then we had to kind of maintain it, right? And into that vacuum came first Al Qaeda, and then as we just kind of, and I think, I'm not sure how it is, right? How we do this, right? I mean, basically, what we wanted to do was to kind of create a structure that could support, liberty and freedoms, and kind of create a beacon of opportunity, right, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But when that didn't happen, and Al Qaeda continued to attack, right, then we kind of had this decision of, what do we do at this point, right? It's not about. I mean, I don't know at that point that it is about waging total war, right? It's about trying to overcome Al Qaeda, and is that at that point it does kind of shift into winning the hearts and minds of people, right? To get them empowered to fight back against Al Qaeda. It's not really something that the U.S. can do, right? So, and then we had the vacuum, right, that we're now kind of in, which is awkward.
There's a common misconception that an insurgency is much harder to fight than a conventional war. An insurgency does have its own difficulties, but fighting Al Qaeda and Jaish al-Mahdi and Sabah al-Haq and Hezbollah and all the other groups, and tons of other groups in Iraq, they were not more determined, more powerful, more equipped, more capable enemies than Germany and Japan. And what we forget is the supply chain of any effective insurgency is the population. When you're fighting an insurgency, you're fighting the population. Once again, when you refuse to fight your supply chain, you cannot defeat your enemy, period. And there's no winning. The whole concept of winning hearts and minds is schizophrenic. If I took a hostage with a gun to his head, and I've got him there, and we were in this standoff, but I'm commenting on how you should probably get some new shoes if you want to get a good job. And have you been to college? Maybe you should go to college. And you know what? After this whole hostage thing, let's go get you a haircut and a nice warm meal. No, it doesn't work like that. And I believe very seriously that that's basically what we're doing. We're trying to win hearts and minds. Say, look, we're building you roads and stuff. We're also shooting at your brother down the street. In the end, you cannot win hearts and minds that way. In the Middle East, people respect whoever is the most powerful. All right? If I walk into your village, and I'm a U.S. soldier, and I say, look, we're here to do good things, we want to build roads, we want to help you, we want to protect you, we want to give you money, and you guys just have to be with us. And then I leave, then the guy who lives next door to you pokes his head out and says, if you support them, I'm going to kill you and your whole family. Which side are you going to go for? You might stand up and say, well, I'm against you. You threatened to kill my family. But you grew up in a completely different society and culture. You're an American. You have the concept of liberty is a completely different concept to you than it is to them. They are going to say, well, I don't necessarily trust the Americans. I don't necessarily trust this guy. But this guy's going to kill me if I don't do what he says. I'm going to do what he says. He's the closer enemy, and he's the one I really have to fear. So yeah, Iraq is very complicated. We did just totally annihilate the Iraq. Not annihilate, but we beat the Iraqi military soundly. But it evolved very quickly into an insurgency, and an insurgency is what we had to deal with after defeating the Iraqi military. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you really say that in a place like Iraq, the only way to really resolve that is to resolve it based on who they are? I mean, and basically, and I think Charles can talk about part of it, but give Kurdistan who they are, give the Shiites who they are, and the Sunnis who they are, because they're not going to get along.
You mean allowing them to have national sovereignty, sort of split them up into separate national sovereignties? Yeah. I'm okay with that idea. Whether or not it will achieve peace is hard to say. However, I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think the lines that are on the map there make sense.
Right.
Now, it's still not some neat, easy thing. You still have a lot of places where it's a mix of Sunni and Shia, and you have Kurds mixed all in and everything else. But yeah, I don't think Iraq as a nation makes sense.
No,
so I think we have to recognize those differences. Yes.
But those people over there have been fighting each other for generations after generations after generations. I mean, for thousands of years, and probably will never stop fighting each other. Like you just said, the Taliban hates this one, they all hate each other. They all fight I wish they'd all kill each other off, personally, but, that ain't going to happen either. So, I don't know that we, or any foreign force, can go in there and really have a plan, so to speak, to bring peace there. And I know that's really not the issue here, and that's not the topic of your discussion, but I just thought I would throw that in. I think a lot of the problem in the Middle East has to do with the fact that I think that we have no consistency when you talk about how they don't trust the Americans.
Yes.
I mean, from administration to administration, 1 minute Saddam Hussein is our friend, the next minute we want to overthrow and kill him, and the same goes. You can name several different leaders over there where we've done that turnabout face.
Yeah.
Secondly, I don't know. Lastly, I just thought this out. I don't know. You said you want to change the people here in America where we could support. Make our government really have a determination to win a war. How in the world do you do that when you have a Congress who has basically capitulated all authority to whatever the executive branch wants to do?
That's a great question. So to help better understand my philosophy, I'm one of those people, I mean, I'm a Marine, so it's just the way I am. If no matter how insurmountable something looks, if it's the right thing, I'm going to do it. And I don't deny that the concept of changing the way the American people and therefore the political system thinks about war basically looks like an insurmountable goal. For all practical purposes, it is impossible. But I have to try to educate people, and this is why I'm so pleased to be here tonight, because without groups like you that I can talk to, I'm just dead in the water. I'm not making any progress. So it's one person, 10 people, 30 people at a time. If I'm making that small difference, maybe eventually it will grow to where there's more. Maybe it won't. But as far as Congress goes, I mean, we need to throw almost all of them out and get new ones, because it really does come down to being decisive. We have an authorization for use of military force in effect from 2003 that had to do with Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and we're still operating on that because neither Congress nor the executive want to be accountable for any decisions they make about warfare now. They want to just let it ride and rest on autopilot from that. And you were talking about the inconsistency of foreign policy. We not only have not had consistent foreign policy from one administration to the next, we don't have consistent foreign policy now. We're fighting for and against Iran's interests in Syria. We're fighting for Iran's interests in Iraq. We're against Iran's interests in Yemen. And we're for Iran's interests in our nuclear negotiations. That is schizophrenic. I would love to answer more questions, but I believe...
Even one?
Yeah, okay, one real quick.
Okay. All of this in the Middle East, ancient history and current history, the only thing I'm concerned about is how much ISIS is there here, how real is the threat of warfare and these horrible events taking place in America?
That's a great question. A lot of it is speculative. Are there likely a number of ISIS sympathizers or supporters in the United States? Yes. Are there any trained ISIS operatives in the United States? Maybe. That's speculative. And what they're willing to do and able to do, a lot of that is speculative as well. One of the good things we have going for us when it comes to ISIS is they've called all Muslims that recognize them as the caliphate to come to the caliphate, that's where they are now, and fight with them. Does that mean they would be opposed to someone detonating a bomb in the U.S.? No. But they believe that their fight is there. So we need to be concerned with them, we need to be vigilant, but most of all, we need to prepare for the way we fight the next war before it happens. So instead of reacting with just in blind fury, we have a plan, and we know how we're going to win, and we execute according to that plan. So that's all. Thank you all very much.